It's interesting, though, because in Europe, given the vastly differing privacy laws across the different countries in Europe, it's like having every state in the US having its own privacy laws that a company has to adhere to. It's insanity. So I think they're going to have to recognize at some sort of EU level that to actually accomplish anything there and to really meet some expectations there, they're going to have to get their act together a little bit and come up with some sort of EU standard.
Well, ENISA has defined it in their guidelines, which is what CCSK has incorporated as well. So they've at least put it there clearly as data protection is a requirement. But at the Congress in Orlando, I asked Scott Charney, from the Microsoft standpoint, same thing with mobile apps. It's kind of like, were you here? Are you guys, anybody here an EU citizen? Where's the application actually located? Where are you actually putting the data into the app or into the cloud? And have you signed off that it's okay to have it go outside the region? And all that stuff has to be worked into this much sooner than them giving it up, because
I think it's
First Amendment right in Europe is your right to privacy. We don't have that right in the U.S. They have that right in Europe. It's not going to go away.
Zombie apocalypse. Heed my words.
Just wanted to throw that out for dialogue.
To your point, I think it's very safe to say that most cloud providers don't have adequate jurisdictional awareness in their service offerings today, and it's an area where they can improve.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, some
Thank
do,
you.
some don't. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. But to your earlier point, even when they do, it's not granular enough, right? So that there's a lot of work still has to occur there, too. Yes, question at the back.
Yasir Muslim with Ernst & Young. So a lot of vendors, I guess some new vendors are proposing tokenization as a way to remediate the risk of putting data in the cloud. So basically what the value add is to allow companies to encrypt all data that's being sent in the cloud and not to have to worry whether the data resides in the US or is transported somewhere else. I'm wondering what the panel thinks about this, these type of products, and what you think the challenges are going to be in terms of the adoption of this kind of technology. Thanks.
I think it's a great solution, and everyone should do it. Absolutely, encrypt everything going up to the cloud. I've given talks on 16 things to do to secure your data in the cloud, and encryptions in 9 of the 16, I think. So that's really important. The problem is actually more of a legal one, where you can say, well, it's safe, it's encrypted. If it did cross a border it wasn't supposed to cross, it's not my data, which is technically true because the key isn't combined with the data. But depending on what country you're talking to, that may or may not be legally recognized. And I think that there are still very big questions about that. So people who are concerned about complying with international regulations around data transport, some of them feel comfortable moving encrypted data over a border and some don't. But most of the rules don't specify that encrypted data is not the data. So I think there just needs to be some change in the standards. In the meantime, you should encrypt it anyway, whether or not it was going to move in.
But I think this is a bit of the previous thread, and I think it's a healthy mix, right? I mean, I think encryption works great in some areas of the world, and this is the future state, right? Tokenization will be the answer in other places. And I think to have a healthy mix, and I know that there's some vendors out there that are doing this, where you can have policy that's geo-aware, that can implement tokenization based off of jurisdiction and certain elements of governance. So I think the answer is a healthy mix is what you're going to see ultimately. Now, whether or not you have this in cooperation with the cloud ecosystem is a different story, or whether or not you kind of force it into the cloud is another direction of where things look like they're going.
So we have a couple more minutes. I want to get to as many questions as we can. So the gentleman who's standing up, you were next, I believe.
Thank you. For retail, PCI is everything. A couple things were said earlier. You want to think creatively and differently in the future and not repeat the mistakes of the past. But then you also said security comes first, compliance comes second. A challenge to you. Perhaps a different way of thinking about compliance, so it isn't an afterthought, it isn't an overhead, so to speak, but it becomes more integrated in the whole security process.
So I'll turn that back on you. You started off with a statement that said for retail PCI is really important. I wouldn't say that. You know, what I would say is for retail, security is really important. Right?
Well,
really. I mean, that's a statement I would make because PCI is security 101.
We understand that.
No, I know,
but you have to meet these nebulous requirements
absolutely.
that are written
So if you do security the right way, as you're suggesting, you can indeed meet these compliance requirements that are part of PCI. I mean, a good security program...
if they're fungible, but many times the compliance requirement is quite the opposite. It depends on the mood of the auditor and the day of the week.
Well, you know what?
That's a serious issue.
Mood as a service.
I hear you. I would kick their butts big time because the reality is that a good security program, if it's well thought out, is going to incorporate those, audit and compliance requirements. In most organizations, that's a process that involves discussion, negotiation, dialogue, where it's about your business, right? I mean, they don't get to come in and just dictate to you. I mean...
I beg to differ.
No, ask other people that are sitting here. It's true.
No, the key point, we're not going to solve it here, but I just wanted to challenge and say, as we discuss moving to the cloud environment, can we possibly think about compliance in any type of different framework, just to change the mentality? That's all I'm trying to challenge you with.
Absolutely.
So that's food for thought. 5 minutes. We have a question here in the white. Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm Ulrich from Object Security. Two-part question. We talked a lot, well, not just you, the whole morning talked a lot about identity as the big thing. I'd like to hear your take on shifting this a little bit to the actual authorization that follows afterwards, where really probably most of the complexity happens. So even if identities are all great and authentication is great, if I don't have the policy, I'm screwed. The second part is this continuous monitoring that was brought up. And I'd also like to shift here from after the fact kind of continuously knowing that you got hacked and fixing it to preventing to be hacked in the first place, which ties in with this whole policy question. And I think we're talking about priorities that I don't share. I'd like to see more preventative, and I'd like to see more policy and less about monitoring compliance, which you do afterwards when everything's enforced.
Yeah,
so
I completely agree with that. Prevention is key.
What's your view on this?
So I'll take the identity one just to start. Authorization entitlements is a great question. I think we're still a number of years away from really, and again, when we talk cloud and we start to talk authorization, I think we have to start to subdivide the cloud a little bit when we start to think about SaaS applications specifically, and possibly PaaS applications as well that are going to offer up the same sort of services that SaaS applications have. When we focus there, you talk about it being complex. I agree. It was complex enough just to get authentication pulled out of those applications over the last 10 years, just to solve the single sign-on problem, so that you didn't have to have authentication happening in every one of those applications. At least with authentication, there was a nice sort of carrot you could wave at the business to say, hey, isn't single sign-on nice? Look how easy this is. As you start to think about allowing enterprises to have more control over the authorization policies that exist in these applications, suddenly the carrot isn't quite there. It comes down to things like, it's easy to do compliance. It means that we can leverage those policies across a number of different applications and get some consistency there. So it really there speaks to understanding what users can do in those applications. It means that those SaaS vendors and PaaS vendors are going to have to expose APIs to allow you to control that programmatically. Understanding what users have done, i.e., what have they been doing in the app, which is more an audit question. I think there's a few things that we can look at to there a little earlier. One is, I think the guy from Intel said, hey, why can't they expose our audit logs? And hence, we can suck down those audit logs and see what people have been doing. Or we can put proxy services in place and funnel the users through a proxy service so that we can see everything that's going on and hence have some local control over what they're doing. So there's a number, I think there's a lot of things that can happen there more effectively than being able to externalize the authorization capabilities of the SaaS applications.
In terms of prevention, it's amazing what you can do. You can turn on all sorts of host-based IDS. You can turn on antivirus, anti-malware services. But if you do it in the cloud, you actually have problems with concurrency. You have problems with performance, sort of the opposite of security that we don't like to talk about in security things, which is fast. If you make something really, 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 really secure, it's probably not going to be fast enough to use unless you've made some very intelligent design decisions. And even then, there's always a cost in performance for security. So one of the things that we do at Trend Micro is we've worked with VMware on using the VMsafe API so that a single security process on a physical machine can service multiple guest virtual machines. In a cloud environment, that means that you can apply proper things that prevent attacks without having to install it 20 times, say, for 20 instances running on the same large server. That has a big impact on the cost of cloud computing, but also has an impact on security because we found out a lot of people in the cloud weren't running basic server security tools because of the performance hit that it was causing.
So
I would just tack on real briefly around authentication. It's context, right? We're moving from role to context, and context, with the request, that's being accessed. I think if you focus on that, you're going down the right path.
Can I just say one quick thing? You can't prevent everything. I mean, the notion that prevention is even possible for certain things is really difficult. You've got to imagine that you can, but you've got to have a very strong detective capability as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my panelists. Good questions. Thank you very much for listening.